Welcome back to Dyknow's Tech Coach Corner YouTube series. I'm Tiara Lustig, your host, and today I'm talking with Holly Clark all about her book, The Google Infused Classroom. I'm sure all of you educators out there are familiar with Holly's book, so today we're diving into what inspired her to really write the book, what it's about, and how it's being used a little bit differently, or what educators are finding that's helping them during this time of remote and hybrid learning. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to Dyknow's YouTube channel so you never miss any of our episodes, as well as follow us on all of our social media. We also announced today our upcoming digital event, the National Student Engagement Summit. We hosted the Florida Student Engagement Summit a couple weeks ago, and we're really excited for the National Student Engagement Summit. So head over to dyknow.com/National Student Engagement Summit. The link is also below in the description, and go ahead and register for that. It's going to be a great conversation with a panel of leading educators, and we can't wait for you to join us. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Holly Clark. Welcome back to Tech Coach Corner, everyone. I'm Tiara Lustig, your host, and today I'm joined by Holly Clark. Holly, would you mind giving a brief introduction to yourself before we get started?
Yeah, so I'm a 20+ year educator who's had a one-to-one classroom since the year 2000. So I've been doing this technology game for a while, which led me to write a blog and write a bunch of books, 3 books to be exact, and talk to audiences around the globe about how to do this effectively. And then the pandemic happened, and it's like my jam, right? This is what I talk about. And so this has been a pretty fun time actually for me.
It's been a great time, obviously devastating in a lot of ways, but a great time for technology integration and technology in the classroom. So really exciting for us as well. We've had some great conversations. I wanted to talk about a little bit today with you about the Google Infused Classroom, which I believe is the first book that you wrote. What kind of inspired you to write the book, and what the book is centered around, and maybe how people can apply what you wrote about before the pandemic even happened to now remote learning?
So yes, the Google Infused Classroom is the first book I wrote, and it's actually probably one of the top sellers in education that there is. And if there's not a New York Times bestseller list for education, they did away with that a few years ago. But if there were, it would be a New York Times bestseller. In the summer, it was selling up there with like Oprah books, and I was like, what's going on? But I think the reason that was happening is because it's about this idea of pedagogy. And we put pedagogy first in the Google Infused Classroom, and then ask the question, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to do really powerful formative assessments? Well, here are some ways that you can do that. Do you want to differentiate instruction? Okay, here are some things that you can do. And so that book has really taken off because of its focus in on pedagogy first, and talking about the skills. It talks a lot about the skills that kids are going to need as Gen Zers in the future, and how we have to really think about that as we're designing lessons. And so like the other day, I was talking to someone about like math, and I said, you know, quadratic equation is good, but a student in their work environment, unless they're an engineer, is not really going to need to know so much about the quadratic equation, but helping a video go viral, or making a video, or being on social media, they're going to need that skill. And in the past, we have been focusing in on content. So now we can still do the content, but have kids create things using like Adobe or Canva, and create some artifacts of their learning that would also make them better at their future job. Because if you learn how to create those little artifacts that bring people to your content, you're going to be super hireable. Even if you decide that plumbing is your thing, you still need to get people to your business. And so like in the Google Infused Classroom, we talk a lot about that kids have to create. They have to make these artifacts that will also help them be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I've never really thought about that before, but it makes so much sense. And I think with technology in the classroom, that is one step further that kids are going in the classroom is they're not only learning content, but they're learning skills that they'll take with them to any job that they go into in any industry that they go into. So I think that's really important. But are there any kind of nuggets in the Google Infused Classroom that you've noticed teachers have really been using more during this time of remote learning or really leaning into heavily during remote learning?
Yeah, so I hear a lot about this. So I wanted to have a framework in that book that people could grab onto. And I find that if you do something simple and you have a framework that's simple, teachers can think about it. So I made this framework for what to think about when you're trying to design technology lessons. And I use these three things. And the first one is, whatever you're designing, you want to use the technology to make student thinking visible. So you ask yourself, how am I making kids thinking visible? If you are writing, there's visibility there, but I want to get into their mind. And that's where like Flipgrid for me is really important, because I want them to talk about it. And when a kid starts talking about their learning, they keep going and going. And I get so much more information than I do with like, is this enough? Did I write enough? And that's what I get a lot from kids. So I want to find ways to make their thinking visible through Flipgrid, through Adobe Spark, tools like that. The second thing that we talk about in this framework is that how can you get at student voice? So when I say student voice, I don't mean them talking per se. I mean like student voice in terms of allowing them to have voice over how they respond to something, maybe even voice and choice. And I don't really care for that term because I think that gets a little overused. But the last thing is, how can I allow them to share their work? And to me, that final one is the most important. Because when a kid shares their work on something like a Padlet where everyone else can see their work, then they look at other kids' works and they say, oh, I didn't answer that way. That's a really interesting way of putting that. I hadn't thought of that. And so when they go look at these other responses, they go into a state of metacognition about thinking. And that is one of the strongest things we can do. And even right now, as I'm co-teaching with a teacher who doesn't know a lot about technology, I'm always saying to her, no, but we need them to all see each other's answers. Like let period 1 and period 5 work together on this Padlet. And and getting her to think in that way has been really important, because I want them to see each other so they can see like, oh, I'm actually answering pretty well. Or I didn't really get that. But they know it, and I don't have to do it with the red ink. They know, they saw the other answers, and they can now come to me if they're want and ask for help. So that's my most important one.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I think with remote learning and hybrid learning, it's important to have those collaborative kind of formats of assessment and lessons and activities so that even if students aren't together, they can still collaborate on things.
But even when they're together, because I keep getting this from my co-teacher, she's like, oh, when they're in groups in school, it's whatever, it's so much better. And I'm like, I don't know. Let me ask you, they're hearing from 2 other kids. Let's say they're in a group of 3. Even if they're in groups of 3, they're hearing from 2 other kids. They don't know what any other groups talked about. And for me, that's not enough. I want them to know what other people have said. So when they sit down at night and they're looking at maybe a Padlet, they'll look at more than 3. They'll want to see, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be honest. When I was like in 8th grade, I would have looked for this boy named Randy Whitlow. I would have read everything that he put because I had a little crush on him. And so I would have learned everything that Randy Whitlow was learning. But like I do when I'm face to face, when kids are in a group of 3, after we're done, we do an activity where we all talk about what we learned in our groups, and we do it digitally so that the other kids can see what other kids talked about. And so I don't want to, like, group work's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big group work person, but I want it to be bigger than that. And technology, digital pedagogy allows us to do that.
Yeah, that great tip. And I think great advice there. Technology is changing education for the better. So I think it's great to hear how passionate you are about that and hear strategies that are working for you and teachers that you work with. So thank you so much, Holly, for sharing that. Can you tell everyone where they might be able to engage with you or find you if they want to learn from you further?
Well, the Google Infused Classroom is on Amazon. If anyone wanted to look at it, you can look inside and see the stuff that's in there. I write a blog at hollyclark.org. I have a podcast that you can just find on Apple iTunes under the Infused Classroom. Let's see what else I do. I feel like I do more than that, and I'm not being able to think of it right now. But YouTube channel, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all of those things too. So at Holly Clark EDU, easy to find, probably more information than you want.
Perfect. Well, we'll link all of that so that everyone can engage with you further. And thank you so much, Holly, for being with us today.
Thank you.